Thank you, everyone. Welcome for joining us in this third session of the McMaster Global Dialogues, which centers on sustainability, climate change, and planetary health. The climate crisis has been described as the most profound and existential challenge of our time. Rising global temperatures, ecological degradation, loss of biodiversity have far-reaching impact on human lives. It has impact on human health. It has impact on access to food and food security. It has impact on water. It has impact on our societies. There are even political impacts to the climate crisis. Water scarcity is often a trigger for wars and conflict between communities and countries around the world. Climate crisis is also responsible for the displacement of populations, which has led to mass migration and the refugee crisis. So however you think about it, climate change has far-reaching implications for our society today, which is why I think it is important that we continue to keep this issue alive. We continue to have conversations about this. And this is exactly what we'll be doing today in this session of the McMaster Dialogue. I'm very pleased to be joined by three very distinguished colleagues. And this is one of the strengths of the McMaster Dialogue, that we have here on campus world-leading experts and thought leaders who are able to bring a unique academic and practical insights to these very important issues. We have with us today Dr. Leah Ravensbergen, who's a professor in the School of Earth, Environmental and Society in the Faculty of Science.
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
It's a mouthful. Thanks for joining us. We have David Cano, who's the Director of Sustainability here at McMaster University. And we have Jim Cotton, who is a professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering, but also the co-director of the McMaster Institute for Energy Studies. You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to the conversation, because I know this is a field that you're all very passionate about, and you've worked in this area. But all of you also bring a very practical lens to this topic, which I think is something that's needed in these conversations. So I'll start with you, Leah. Your work really highlights the importance of equitable, sustainable transportation system, particularly through gender and age lens. Can you speak to how cities, municipalities, societies, or even institutions like McMaster can reimagine energy transportation systems in a way that it's more sustainable given the challenges and the crisis we face today?
Yeah, absolutely. As we globally become more urban, cities have a greater and greater role to play in climate mitigation and adaptation. And I'm particularly interested in cities. I grew up in the country, so I'm a city girl now. You always want what you don't have growing up. There's more and more people in cities. A lot of the energy that's being used is in cities. Cities are really where a lot of that work needs to happen. And I specifically focus on transportation, as you mentioned. Transportation is a key player here. 30% of Ontario's emissions are from the transport sector. This is a key area that we can cut emissions, and also an area where emissions are still growing. And my work argues that to do that, we need to stop planning our cities around the private car. We can still have cars, but we can't plan everything around the car. When you plan things around the car and not other options, it just makes it hard to get around any other way. Cars are very high emitting in terms of carbon emissions. And more importantly, they also have other externalities in terms of the environment, health, and equity. Even in the US, where it's the easiest it can be to drive, 30% of the population can't drive. Some of them are 2 or 3. Of course, they can't drive. They're children. But even amongst people who are the age where they can drive, 15% of the population does not have a license, where they make it the easiest and the cheapest. That's still a significant part of the population that you are not including in your transportation planning if you plan around the private car. So I'm interested in those people who are more often excluded from private car ownership due to costs or aging or other reasons. So I do my research specifically on how we can make that transition towards more sustainable cities take into account gender or age or race or other social equity implications.
Well, thank you very much, Leah. So you're really interested in how it impacts people,
Yeah, how it impacts people, but also just, uncovering some of the biases we have. Can I give you an example?
Yes, please.
One of the things I'm most excited about right now is all the travel we do for care purposes. This is what we call mobility of care. These are your trips to pick up your kids, take care of older relatives, get your groceries, drop people off places, go to health appointments. These trips don't seem that important currently in our travel surveys because it turns out, what I found is our travel surveys don't measure those trips directly. They measure getting to work, they measure getting to school, and then those care trips get often categorized as like leisure or other. And when you measure them directly, they're actually a third of adults' trips. That's a lot of trips that are mostly done by women, mostly low-income women, and tend to take place near people's homes. So they're the perfect trips to transition towards sustainable mobility, and yet there's something we do not consider in the sustainable mobility transition. It'd be very easy to get these short trips done by bike, foot, or bus, and yet they tend to be done by car because we really don't plan how to get to these places with other transportation modes. And that's particularly important for low-income women. All people, everybody does care. Older adults do a larger proportion of care as well. So this bias in our data results in a bias in the infrastructure we have, which results in just different experiences for different people in our cities. So that's the kind of thing I get excited about.
Thank you very much. Yeah. That's very insightful. I'll turn now to Dave. Your insights are going to be really interesting because it goes back to the whole point about universities and academics practicing what they preach. The McMaster Sustainability Strategy aims to make McMaster a living lab for sustainability. So in some ways, it's a reflection of this commitment, not only to theorize about climate change and study climate change, but to implement it right here on our campus. Can you speak to some of the initiatives in this regard and how, to what extent this is scalable? How practical is it to extend this to the broader context of the city or other communities?
Absolutely. And I have to say, I'm very privileged to be able to work as a director of sustainability because I have access not only to that operational side of universities, working with our facilities team, for instance, that designs, constructs, operates, maintains our facilities on a daily basis, just to be able to have everyone go do teaching, learning, research activities. I get to work with researchers like Leah and Jim here because we're basically a small city. If you think about it, McMaster has close to 60 buildings on its main campus, over 4 million square feet of built infrastructure. We have dineries, we have a fleet of vehicles moving around. We have research that happens 24/7, and we have people living on campus 24/7 as well. So we need to make sure that we're providing energy in terms of heating, cooling, electricity throughout the year to make sure that people are protected and are able to continue operating for any reason whatsoever on campus. So the actions that we can implement here are basically a pilot of testing ideas and solutions that could potentially be implemented in the city of Hamilton or even beyond. I'm sure you've heard that Canada as a whole wants to become a decarbonized country by 2050. McMaster has the same goal to do it by 2050 or earlier. So the technologies and solutions we can implement here, I believe, are easily scalable beyond the boundaries of McMaster, just because it's the same technologies, it's the same applications, it's the same solutions that we're looking for everyone else on campus. How we do that is we need to work with a lot of people. We involve our students, staff, and faculty in different research projects. So we have the sustained courses, which I hope many of you have heard about. We invite students from different faculties to pitch ideas on how we can solve most of the most pressing challenges we have on campus and outside. And they perhaps can become some of the most successful programs we can implement on campus and beyond.
Thank you. And would you say there have been any particular challenges to doing that, given the size of McMaster, of course, the limited resources of an academic institution?
I'd say, having access to resources is always a challenge, because when you want to implement a new project, you need to have the resources enough to make it scalable and to make it successful. But what I really love about McMaster is that the management here is really believes in sustainability, and they've put all the resources and on the support we need to make this happen. So when we pitch ideas around, okay, we want to try this solution, we want to try this technology, we don't usually hear no. It's like, yes, but we need to find ways to make it happen. So that's when we come in with partners such as Leia and Jim, or with external funding organizations or community groups that can help us make it a reality. But one way or another, we just find a way to make it happen.
Thank you so much. I turned to Jim. You're a professor entrepreneur, so you kind of bridge the town and the gown, in your approach to sustainability, so to speak. And you're interested in integrating energy system, optimizing energy sources in a way. We're talking about how that is central to a lasting and sustainable solution. First, can you speak to what this exactly means from a layman's point of view, what that means? And two, what do you see as the most promising technology in this whole integrated ecosystem that you envision as a solution to the climate crisis?
Sure. I think when I look at energy, right now our energy is completely siloed. Okay, we have electricity that we use for everyday lives, our institutions, our buildings, our industry. Then, how do we heat our homes? 74% of homes in Ontario are heated by natural gas, another silo. How do we drive around? Well, it's gas for the most part, and a little bit of electricity. They're completely separate and independent. We're moving towards a convergence point where they're going to be completely integrated. But how can we integrate it? And the issue around a siloed approach to energy delivery is that we actually waste more energy than we actually use. So we dump energy into the atmosphere, right? We dump energy into our lakes. We do that through our cooking processes in our restaurants. We do that when we make isotopes at McMaster University. We have 3 megawatts of heat, but our reactors focus on isotopes. We do cooling all year round. We have a big chimney. How can we capture that? How do we harvest that and recycle that energy? That is the whole focus of my research. And I do that from my company, Harvest Systems, which works on restaurants at the restaurant level, taking that heat from ovens, fryers, griddles, terribly inefficient processes, and then reusing that inside of the building. Why? Because it helps with the affordability crisis around restaurants, right? The margins are so slim. If you can save them 10, 15% or improve their profits, that's great. That's the only reason you can do that is because waste heat, waste energy is more valuable than natural gas. And that people don't understand that. So how do we commoditize waste heat? And to answer your second question, what is the interesting technology? It's not really a technology as such as it's infrastructure. If you think about Canada, okay, there's the Deloitte barometer on infrastructure for social good, okay, that came out very recently. Canada and UK are number 1 and 2. How are we number 1 and 2? Railways, right? Started there. Our road infrastructure, our electrical infrastructure, our IT infrastructure, our natural gas infrastructure, our gas infrastructure. Why are we so successful as a country? Because we've built infrastructure. Infrastructure is an equitable way to deliver services, right? You can amortize it over 100 years. What do we not have? Infrastructure to heat our homes. So to me, the next evolution of infrastructure for social good is to build out something I call thermal networks. What are thermal networks? They're pipes in the ground, right? They deliver heat. So you can be a prosumer, You could be a grocery store, or you could be an arena, right? You're dumping heat all the time. We capture that heat, put it into our pipes. Okay, maybe it's the summertime. We store that in seasonal thermal storage systems. What are you doing right now? You're integrating your energy systems. You're saving your wasted energy in the summertime, you use it in the wintertime, during the peaks. You can essentially, there's so much waste heat. There's twice as much waste heat in Ontario as their demand for heating in all buildings. So if we could start to figure out how to build this infrastructure out, we can have a huge impact. Because if you look at Toronto, 54% of our carbon emissions comes from building. And most of that is building heating systems. So how do we bring this forward?
Oh, thank you so much, Jim. I mean, what you just described seems to me like a no-brainer. You know, it just makes sense. But you also mentioned something that I'm thinking, well, maybe that's the issue. Amortization. That we need to invest in this upfront, you know, and you know, I can imagine people saying, well, it's a great idea, but how are we sure it will pay off in 10 years and 20 years? And we have to sell these ideas, good as they are, to the public. How do you address that? How do you address this cost consideration that it appears to me is, you know, the roadblock to what is otherwise a wonderful initiative?
100%. I think we have 200 district energy systems in Canada. McMaster University heats an entire campus by district energy system. So does MIP. They're projects. They're not infrastructure. So we haven't built that into a regulated utility or regulated environment. What does that mean? What is that? Amortization just gives you the ability to amortize it over a very long time. And the only people who can really do that, or entities who can do that, are the local distribution companies, the Hydro Ones, the Enbridge gases, right? So they build infrastructure and they get 9% return. People argue with me about that, but for the most part, that's about right, okay? Forever. If you got a 9% return on your RSPs, would you do it? I would too. I would put all my money right there tomorrow, right? And that's what pension funds want to do. So where could the money come from? Is big pension funds, teacher funds, things like that. But you need that sense of security for them to invest in that infrastructure, right? If that district energy system could go away because it's too old or the owners haven't invested in it, then you know what? Then that's not risk-free. Your electrical wires to your house are risk-free. Your gas pipelines to your house are risk-free. So if we had gas to your house versus a hot water pipeline to your house, and the hot water was cheaper, would you hook up?
Of course.
Yeah. And that's what we need to do.
Thank you so much. So let's shift gears a bit to the other side of this conversation. That yes, we have all these aspirations for a green transition, a more sustainable future, but there are costs associated with this. The whole concept of just transition, whether you're speaking to the oil sand workers in Alberta who see their livelihoods effectively being taken away by all this talk about sustainable energy, or you're talking to coal miners in Ohio who, you know, practically losing their jobs because of a green transition. We all agree that it's something that ultimately needs to be done, but we can't sidestep the fact that it does cost in terms of opportunities for people working in the fossil fuel industry at this point. And Leah, this is exactly what you're interested in, which is the equity part of, you know, this whole debate, the sustainability part. How do we address that? Because these are real questions that stand in the way of solutions.
Well, I rarely work with people who work in the oil sands in Alberta or in the coal mines that you mentioned. However, I'm a big believer in community-engaged research, or participatory research. That's what I started saying. It's really important as researchers. We can sometimes forget who's actually being impacted and that they actually have a lot of knowledge that we can learn from. So all of my research projects are always done in collaboration with people who plan, use, or are part of the transportation system. And I think this can be applied in other contexts as well. I think you'd often be surprised what people's concerns on oil fields or coal mines are, and having them involved in research projects can really help you make sure you have a full picture and know how to approach these topics. We too often can downplay and assume what people are thinking. You should go straight to the source. And at McMaster, we do have the Office of Community Engagement, which is an excellent resource for people who want to try and want to do this type of engaged research. And I think all disciplines should really be doing more of it to have more impactful projects.
Yeah, thank you. And same question to Dave, but in a different way. How do we address, even within, a microsystem like McMaster, a green transition that is also a just transition? In other words, we recognize that we want to be more efficient, but there might be cost associated. And how do we mitigate that cost? In UN language, it's adaptation and mitigation. You adapt, but you also mitigate.
That's correct.
How
yes.
are we doing that?
So I think we have to keep reminding ourselves that as a university, it is our duty to protect our community and to have a resilient operation. So that comes with a cost. And I think that cost will continue to increase as long as we don't do anything about it. And I think McMaster has been doing a lot around climate change, both mitigation and adaptation. So from a building design perspective, we're making sure that our facilities are able to withstand more aggressive weather patterns and conditions, and that they're able to provide a safe environment for anyone whenever power goes out or when we don't have heating or cooling being generated in our central plant. At the same time, I think the partnerships I was talking about and working with internal and external organizations can help us figure out some economies of scale. Because sometimes when we work in silos, we tend to do things that someone else already did. So we spend a lot of time, resources, and effort in things that someone else already figured out for you. So if we're able to make those connections with people that know how to do it in a more efficient way, then it's easier for us to say, okay, you know what, I thought it was going to be much more expensive, but it really isn't, because there's a different way to achieve the same solution that I want. So as an example of what Jim was mentioning, the waste heat. We have a nuclear reactor on campus that works quite a bit, generates a lot of heat, and that's just dissipated in the environment. We don't do anything with it. So we're looking at the feasibility of how can we capture the heat coming out of that reactor and inject it into our own thermal system, so that we're reusing that waste heat and removing the costs and impacts associated with that natural gas. So it's those kinds of things that we're trying to identify. How can we ensure that we're can't call them really low-hanging fruit because they're not really that easy to achieve, but it's a way for us to do more with less, in a way.
Yeah, I know our President David Farrar has been a champion of modular nuclear reactors as an alternative energy source. So it's interesting to see that there is some conversation about how that can be part of the solution, the broader solution for sustainability, not just in McMaster, but elsewhere.
Absolutely, and I think now that you mentioned the modular reactors, I think if it's something that McMaster were able to look further in the future, it's not something that can only be implemented on campus. It's a way for us to test how these solutions can be implemented in northern communities or other communities that do not have reliable and affordable access to energy. And so in a way, it helps McMaster, but it also helps us help other communities to try to understand what the impact of those solutions is.
And precisely, that is what we want, that some of these initiatives that we're testing in our laboratory, that is this community, find relevance beyond our campus community.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Jim, back to you. So you work with cities, which is something I find very interesting in your research, that you're not just thinking about a solution in a lab or, within the confines of campus. You've actually worked with municipalities trying to figure this out. What are the possibilities and the challenges of translating some of these bright ideas that you have to the municipal level, to city council, to having cities adopt them and run with them?
So I would argue that the cities want to address climate change more than any other level of government. And you see that. through their community energy plans or their climate action plans. I've been involved, I live in Burlington, so I've been involved as a volunteer on their community energy plan and then climate action plan for the last 15, maybe a little bit longer years. And you see a true, authentic attempt to make a difference, right? And it's because they have the closest relationship to the people, right? And the people want to see that done. They want to stop the flooding in Burlington that has happened, again, just very recently. They see the impact of climate change. Like we've had 100-year storms like 3 times in the last 15 years. You know, that's an artifact of climate change. And there's other things that could happen. You look at the fires out west, right? We see the impacts. Now, the nice thing about the communities is I think they're the ones that are the infrastructure. They're the real infrastructure builders. That's why I work with them. So my goal is to help them and support them to discover the opportunity that they could achieve through that. Now, the challenge they have is they have no money. It's just the way wealth is distributed in terms of our taxes is they get none. They get property taxes, and property taxes are essentially enough to maintain. They're not enough to build. So how do you go to the next level? What do they need to do? Either they need to have more power given to them through either the provincial or federal governments, or they need to start building out partnerships, private-public partnerships that could happen. And both models can work. You could have a utility-based model that's owned by the municipality. We have it here. HCE Energy is the thermal network for the city of Hamilton. They're owned wholly by the city of Hamilton. You could have maybe Enbridge comes in and they support a community in that infrastructure. And they partner. So what could the city provide? Guess what? The land, the right-of-ways, the streets. So there's a lot of value in that. There's a tremendous amount of value in that. So some places like UK, that they get 50% of the ownership of that utility, whereas the private side gets the other half. So it's trying to find methods for them to move forward with their agenda and to support their community, because it's very difficult. If you think that the initiative we have right now is to electrify everything, I don't believe in it at all. I'm sorry, it's not a real option. Okay? On the car side, I'm very happy to say that. Okay, let me correct myself. But on the heating side, it's absolutely not true. Okay? We use the same amount of energy in a year, on average, for heating our buildings as we do for electricity for all purposes, industry, residents, commercial, institutional. Okay, same amount. But our peak on the coldest day of the year is 5 times higher. So we need 5 times more nuclear power plants, 5 times more Niagara Falls, which is really hard, 5 times more wind turbine projects, 5 times more solar to meet that peak demand. It's not realistic, right? So the communities have that opportunity. You know why? Because they have the resources. They have the waste heat. They have the land to store it. They have the roads to build the infrastructure. Guess what? There's a pipeline there. Let's put another one beside it. Let's start planning our infrastructure. Oh, we're going to replace our pipelines because we have 100-year-old pipelines in Hamilton. Let's put a hot water pipeline and a return pipeline there. So I think that's the opportunity to work with communities and sort of give them a bit better voice.
Yeah. And if I may, sorry.
I also work with cities, and I agree. Cities they're so well-intentioned, and cities are doing more than other levels of government, which is surprising because often they don't have that much power. But I think in your case, it's not politically contentious to say, oh, we actually have all the energy, we can just rejig it, and a lot of it's getting wasted. But other things, I actually think we need to have less energy being consumed, and that requires some behavior change. And that's where the work I do is just very political. And cities, and I think everybody goes, well, nobody wants the transport sector to be 30% of emissions. We want to reduce that. But then if you go, well, can you get on the bus? It's like, no. And trying to make that not politically contentious, and everybody has the right intentions, it's actually more political issues. And this is where the politics are really important. And we can't just rely on technology. We need behavioral change. These things are political. They involve a lot of engagement. And that component's really challenging and really important. Yeah, you're gonna.
No, thank you. So I was going to say, I have worked in the municipal environment. So before coming to McMaster, I was part of the Town of Oakville. And working on their facilities management sector, I was able to experience some of those things from the other side of the equation, because you see a lot of these organizations coming at you, trying to pitch ideas and solutions that you can implement. And there's definitely that appetite, even from the distribution companies, although it might seem challenging for them. They want people to use less resources in general, because for them to be able to provide the level of service that requires to maintain our level of quality of life, they need to invest a lot of money in their infrastructure. So if it's easier for them to reduce the amount of energy they're generating for all clients, it's even better for them. It's better for everyone, because they don't have to spend a lot of money they don't have right now to build more infrastructure to be able to support the services that we need.
Yeah, interesting. Leah, you talked about the political will and the political aspect of this. This really is the elephant in the room, isn't it? That you have political leaders across the world today who are climate deniers, who basically saying, climate change doesn't exist. There is the debate we're having even in this country about carbon tax and the burden it places on our wallets, and whether it's, what all the effort. So there is a very strident political dimension, behavioral dimension to all of these issues. Good people can agree on the need to do something about it, but oftentimes when it comes to the political decision making, that's where the rubber hits the road. So this is a general question to the panel. What can we, and you all work in these areas, you are all interested in system level changes that can have real world impact. How do we sell this message in a world like that we live in today, where there are competing priorities, geopolitical tension, financial crisis, tariffs? There are many other issues that attract the attention of the world and political leaders. How do we keep the eyes of everyone on the ball, that this is important and we need to do something? How do we pass that message?
I can start. I think right now we're in an interesting time. And the opportunity for Canada to invest in itself has never been better. Yeah. And if you think of what I would invest in right now, is energy sovereignty, right? So if we focus on energy sovereignty, you can get everybody on board on that. You get the unions on board, right? The unions, if they champion this, you'll see it happen. It's happened in New York City, right? They've partnered with the utilities to look at opportunities to retool their skills. If we look at policy changes that we can focus on around making this happen, which is part of the utility regulatory environment model, access of right-of-ways and things like that. The ability for the municipality to take out loans and build out their infrastructure and partner with pension funds or other multinational companies or Canadian companies. I think that's a big opportunity, and I think right now we can sell that very, very well. What does that do? That not only retools possibly our automotive industry. What do we need? We need heat pumps. Well, heat pumps are really elegant pieces of equipment that could be made by automotive manufacturers tomorrow. Why in the world would we be selling heat pipes or selling heat pipes that we have to import from other places around the world when we could be manufacturing? We have this amazing skilled trade here. Okay, let's build our own heat pumps. We have steel, right? ArcelorMittal Dofasco right down the street. Well, what are pipelines made out of? Steel, right? Oh, we have boreholes, thermal storage. We have one over here underneath the Hatch Center for Experiential Learning. It stores heat all summer long, and we take it out in the wintertime. What is it? A bunch of holes in the ground drilled by someone that knows how to drill stuff. What is that? Oh, the oil and gas industry. So if you think about, if we present this properly to Canadians, that this is a Canadian play, then elbows up, right?
Elbows up, indeed. Do you see an intersection with your work here?
I think there's been so much emphasis in recent years on like technology and STEM and science, and that's great, and we have these great, ideas. What we've done less well is forgotten the importance of like the social sciences and the humanities and actually selling these ideas to the public and knowing how the public's engaging with them. We were able to create a vaccine in like a year with COVID, but we weren't able to convince everybody to take it, right? And now we see the implications of that. And like in really investing in the social sciences and the humanities is key here. We need that to make sure that we're doing that kind of community work and that engagement work and that political side. Our most recent provincial election had like one of the lowest voter turnouts ever, especially among youth. Like this is our future and this is such a contentious time and people aren't voting. We're clearly not doing well on that side of the equation, even though we're doing such incredible work in other factors. So I also see these big picture kind of, it's important to emphasize all of those, STEM and technology things. They're so important, but we really need to also emphasize all the other important work we do to ensure that everybody gets access to this and understands what's happening and how to make change.
Yeah, and I have to agree. I think change management is going to be crucial for us moving forward. I think the technology is there. We're not talking about new solutions that no one's ever thought about. I mean, there's countries that have done this for decades. But what we're lacking here that I think we can start implementing more is integrating everyone as part of the solution. It's not just facility services or faculty engineering or faculty of humanities or social science or science.
I'm actually in the faculty of science, so I'm very pro-science.
But what I think is we need to start thinking about how do we integrate everyone as part of the solution, and how do we think about the change in mentality that's going to require from everyone when we move from a model that's been used for longer than decades in a way of doing different things. So as Jim was mentioning, how can you convince people that they're going to still be working, but they're going to be doing something different, achieving a similar output, but in a way that it really, they can see themselves as part of the solution. They can see how they fit in that.
Well, and having them be part of the solution.
Exactly.
It's not going to explain to people, this is going to be your new job now.
No,
don't worry, it's fine. It's going here. What are your concerns? How do we do this together? Because they have a lot of knowledge that we take for granted.
Yeah, it has to start at the very beginning. Right? Like one of my favorite projects right now is a project with Arlene Davidson and Robert O'Brien in political science. We have a student that is working on a comparative study on how do you heat homes around the world and what are the regulatory environment, what are the policy environments. And it's really interesting because there's a really great engagement. We're writing right now, we just submitted a piece to the conversation, Caleb and I, on this sort of technical / political play and what is needed to make this happen. This is why I'm like so involved on the regulatory side, is because I have this interaction. It's not because I figured it out on my own. It's because I have brilliant students that are driving this change, and they understand the challenges, and they go abroad and look at the other opportunities. So I think these type of opportunities, and then of course on the Indigenous engagement, right? If you think about the infrastructure deficit in the Indigenous communities across Canada, it is unbelievable. It's hundreds of millions of dollars, right? We have to address that. How? There's definitely ways we can do that. SMRs are one of the potential opportunities. Renewables are definitely a potential opportunity. But I think that when we start having the conversation before we have the technology presented, the solution presented, I think there's a huge opportunity to make that interdisciplinary work. And that's the beautiful thing about working in a place like this, right, at McMaster University, where you have all of these amazing people, students that never say, I can't do that. No, we've tried that before. I never hear that. You know, I'm from the automotive industry. I was a young engineer right out of school, and I heard that more times than I can remember. I came here, I've never heard it again.
Wow, that's great. And it's glad that you mentioned the Indigenous communities, because that's very important. In one of the first sessions of the McMaster Dialogue, we talked about Indigenous knowledge and how it could be a solution to, in the context of that conversation, peace and conflict around the world. But here I see relevance for sustainability and how we can draw on long-standing Indigenous knowledge to be part of the solution mix for sustainability. Leah, you also talked about the interdisciplinary value of this conversation. One of our colleagues who couldn't join us, who's supposed to be in this panel, is Thomas Marius, who's a professor in the Department of Economics, I think political science, I'm not sure now. But he works on how we can find the financing for all this great work. And he has an interesting proposition for leveraging public banks, public banks around the world. He talks about building an ecosystem of public banks that can invest in these new technologies to make them more sustainable. Thank you all for this great conversation. I'm sure there'll be many questions to follow. We'll take a break now, and when we come back, our audience will have an opportunity to pose questions to the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, welcome back, and thank you again to our panelists for that very insightful conversation on an important topic of sustainability, climate change, and planetary health. This is the point where we give our audience an opportunity to ask questions to the panelists. Your questions may be directed to a particular panelist or a general question that any panelist can address. So who wants to go first? Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for the great discussion here. I'm Brazilian, so I come from a country that's very large, such as Canada. But the main difference I see is the density of people in Canada. It changes dramatically, especially when you are out of the Windsor-Montreal corridor or Quebec corridor. So you were talking about infrastructure development a lot and the aspects of in terms of like how people behave on different cities and societies. So how do you see guaranteeing the same standards and opportunities for people that are living, let's say, in Toronto or Montreal, but actually someone living in the northern parts of Canada that doesn't have necessarily the same variety of infrastructure or opportunities, but still wants to have a very high standards of living, such as Canada is able to provide?
Yeah, so Yellowknife for someone in the Northern Territories. Good question. Who wants to take that?
Well, I'm a geographer, so I'm very happy to hear that. Place matters, like we know it does, and we know in Canada we have pretty large urban-rural health divides. It's one of our biggest divides. We literally don't live as long if you live in rural areas, which as somebody from a rural area with aging parents in a rural area is very upsetting, of course. And I don't think we pay enough attention to this. If we think of we just did some research with Transport Canada on EV adoption. We want to have full EVs sold in Canada by 2030. How do you do that in a rural area where there's no infrastructure? And we often forget that just how heterogeneous rural areas are. There's a big difference between where I grew up, which is an hour away from a major city, and an area that's a fly-in community where they have to have full EVs by 2030. So I definitely think we need more consideration of that. And maybe a good way forward is just remembering the inequalities that we have to kind of have that as our guiding light of why this work is important.
Thank you, Leah.
I think that you have to target different geographic areas with different types of infrastructure. So I give a hard time to heat pumps, but you know what? The rural community is going to have heat pumps. Yeah. Okay, we set up programs so that everybody could have a heat pump. Well, you know what? We should have set up a program that people on propane or oil that are in rural areas can get heat pumps first. And it should be in an area that they help them afford it. Don't give it to people down here. We could have infrastructure to support that. We need to sort of target the right incentive programs, the right infrastructure type programs for the right communities, right? So I think that that's a very important play. And I also think things like charging stations are critically important across all of Canada. Right? If you can build roads all across all of Canada, you can put electrical wires all across all of Canada, we can start to have more affordable charging stations for all of Canada. But it just has to be done and executed. So I don't think the same infrastructure is going to be used in all communities. That said, can you do thermal networks in a very small system? Absolutely. We have one at MIP. How many buildings are at MIP? Right? 2 real buildings, 3, sorry, we have a thermal network, right? So, and what does that allow? Well, guess what? You could grow that thermal network. There's another building come on, you build into it. That new building pays for the infrastructure that was built previously. So you can do this at relatively small scale. So I think that consideration has to come in play, and I think we need more focused and targeted incentive programs around energy in particular, and I think around heat. Okay, so people complain about being hot in the summertime. There's only 400-degree heating days. It's a measure. It means it's not very much. There's 400-degree cooling days. There's 4,000-degree heating days. Okay, can you imagine the implications of people losing power, minus 40, having an ice storm for weeks on end? Heat is a right.
Yeah.
And I think we have to start understanding that heat is a right.
Particularly in our environment.
Yes.
I'd say perhaps adding to this conversation is we need to put a face to the challenges that people are facing in those communities, because sometimes I think we lack context when we're talking about the challenges that some of those communities are facing. So you come from Brazil, I'm originally from Mexico, and growing up, I remember we had times where we were out of power for 3-4 days in a row. So thankfully there, the weather is not as bad that we don't have heating or cooling. We don't need heating or cooling. There's no such thing there. But imagine having to go 3 to 4 days without, being able to use your oven, without having to have a hot shower, without heating food. Like those kinds of things have an impact, and people don't necessarily understand the impacts beyond, you don't have power. Well, yeah, but power is just a means of doing something. You need to live, you need to work, you need to transport yourself. So there's a lot of different impacts that come from how reliable or not that energy source is. So the more we make it personal for people, knowing, you know what, it's not only affecting infrastructure, it's not only affecting how we generate or how we deliver that energy, it's just how it's affecting the quality of life of our fellow Canadians in other communities. Then we can start, it can put more pressure on society as a whole that we need to tackle these issues.
Good. Another question? I think you had your hands up. Yes.
Hi there. So some projects that I've been involved in the past have to do with researching plants to figure out how we could potentially modify them to be like more robust agricultural crops. So I think that a lot of biologists are talking about potentially engineering plants as a solution to make them more robust in kind of changing climate conditions. And while I think that type of research is like super promising, I sometimes feel that kind of techno-solutionism is maybe distracting us from the kind of degrowth that we need to do to actually resolve this climate crisis before it's too late. So I suppose I'm asking, like, what do you make of those concerns that maybe the appeal of technology is distracting us from other work that's equally important?
Good question.
Everyone wants a technology silver bullet, right? Where you go, don't worry, nothing needs to change. We'll just fix all our problems with this new innovation and jobs will be created. And my worry too is that we don't want to engage in those more challenging political discussions. And that really that's what needs the most work, unfortunately. So I'm with you. Yeah. Let's carry that skepticism.
And adding to that, I mean, food waste in particular is one issue. I don't think it's about we need to generate more food or make it more resistant. It's about how can we waste less food and make it reach the communities that need it at the right time, in the right place. And I think that's the same with energy, for instance. So we generate more than enough energy to heat and power our houses for the entire year. We just waste a lot because we don't know how to do it. We don't store it. We don't save it. We don't reuse it. We don't capture it. So you're right, we sometimes think of technology as a solution, but it's only one of the tools. And you're right, it's very distracting because we think, oh yeah, it's very shiny, very new technology. They're using it everywhere. But is that really what you're trying to tackle, or do you need to think more about what's the root cause of the issue? And how do you tackle that? A lot of times it's not technology. Technology will only take you so far. It's people and change, and how do you engage the right people at the right time and the right place to come up with those solutions?
Yeah, I'm an engineer, and I like technology, but you have to transition that technology beyond what your research is, and there's only you only do that if your customer wants it, right? So I think that if you're working on a technology and you have a customer and they're engaged, and that's a sustainable solution, then that's the way to do it. And well, how do you do that? Well, you start working on the technology immediately with the customer. Like pushing technology, I think, is what we do the worst, right? We really have to have a pull for our technologies. And I think that is like understanding the community, understanding the pinch points, understanding the hardships of your customer, of society. So I love technology, but my students know I say this all the time. Eventually, you have to shoot the engineer, right? And you have to go out and build that and create it. Yes, you can make it better and better and better and better and better forever and ever and ever. But there's a point where you say, okay, let's put it out there to the community. Let's see if there's a pull, okay? And I think that's really, really important. So don't give up on technology, but I think that there's a whole bunch of other things that are really, really important that come along with your pursuit of understanding that.
So the message is technology is important, but it's part of the solution. There has to be behavioral changes if we want to address this holistically.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just to clarify, I'm not anti-technology. I'm an engineer as well, so I'm passionate for technology, but I also understand the limits that it has and that it can impose on us. So it's just finding that balance.
We've had a lot of technological innovation and yet very little impact on stopping climate change. So clearly, it's great. I want the
100%.
engineers,
No, you're
but
right.
it's clearly that's not the only thing we need.
No, that's so right.
It reminds me of the old Mahatma Gandhi saying, the world has enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed.
Yes.
You know, so we have enough. Next question. Let's take the one at the back. Yeah.
So I have a question that may be more addressed to the engineers, and there's been a lot of talk, 2 comments in this conversation about using the waste heat from the McMaster nuclear reactor. And in my understanding, that's incredibly low temperature heat. It's like 40 to 30 degrees. And traditionally, that's not practically useful for heating anything. And so that's one question. How do we do that? And then the other question is, I think that sort of informs a lot of understanding about the difficulty of using heat in district heating systems, in that thermodynamically, it's a lot easier to move electricity than heat. And so in my mind, it's a lot easier to use electrically powered heat pumps for that than to move vast amounts of, in the MNR's case, slightly warm water around, and in some cases, hot water around. But is it not easier to move electricity around?
So great question. Okay. Yeah. So the answer is, it comes back to thermodynamics, which is Thermo 101, in which I teach. So you can use a heat pump, and the heat pump can take it from minus 40 degrees Celsius to 20 degrees Celsius, right? And essentially, when you do that, you have an efficiency of 100%, which is great. But heat pumps are known for having efficiencies of greater than 100%. That's what they're really for, right? So now if I bring that waste heat up to 35 degrees Celsius, right? And my COP is now 4, 5, 8, I use 8 times less electricity. So the hotter the source you have, the better opportunity you have to deliver that heat. So there's been a lot of investment in heat recovery heat pumps. So you're saying the same thing as I'm saying. I'm just using a different source for my energy, and it's that waste heat. And
Waste heat powering the heat pumps.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. We could do that from a nuclear reactor here at McMaster University. We could do that from a nuclear reactor at Darlington or Pickering if we wanted to. Yeah. Right? There's more waste heat from those reactors than we use in total heat. Now, you bump that up with a heat pump. You have a thermal corridor. They've done this in other jurisdictions around the world. There's this opportunity. Heat pumps are not new. We've had refrigeration for 100 years, right? So it's just redeploying this in a different way. Does that answer both of your questions? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I was talking to Jim. I used to live in Scandinavia, in Denmark for many years, and in Finland for some years. And like you said, in other jurisdictions, that's what they do. It's the heating systems are piped into your house. It's just the way the society runs. So what you're really saying is something that's been experimented with elsewhere and it's been found to work.
Yes.
So something to explore. Any other questions? We have 6 minutes more, yes.
Hi, thank you. I'm wondering if we can go back to something that was touched on very briefly, but the labor movements and the labor unions within the idea of a just transition. So from my understanding, a lot of people within unions have the same worries. They have the worry of the fear of being out of job. They have the worry of kind of, how can I support my family? How can I support my community? What happens to our communities that are very rooted in fossil fuel extractions? But then the unions themselves have also kind of mobilized this idea of just transition and have proposed things like job retraining to kind of help workers fit new positions. And so I'm just wondering, how can kind of that be incorporated into a broader social idea of Canada as a whole? How can Canada, or how can McMaster, some of the smaller kind of, because labor unions are limited in their power of getting their workers from their union to a new job, but they can help inform governments or policies or things like that.
So I think it's engagement. It comes down to immediate, right now engagement. And I think the example I use all the time is New York City. They've turned their thermal network into a utility with the focus of retraining people in the gas industry. So, you put down gas pipelines, you put down water pipelines. They've engaged that exact union. They came in, they do the retraining. They said, I already know how to do that, right? It's just, I think, ensuring that they're not going to lose in terms of their compensation. They're not going to lose in terms of their expertise. That they'll maintain their current sort of standard of living as this transition happens. But I think it has to begin with them helping champion these type of initiatives. And I think that once you get the unions wanting this and understanding that this is good for them, especially in this weird world we're living in right now, right? Everything I worry about is, I'm from the automotive industry. I'm so worried about my friends that are still at Dana right now. I saw this at 08. I came here in 07. I left right at the sweet spot of time. And I saw what was happening the year before 08, which is the big financial crash, right? We're heading for that. I'm worried right now just with the sort of chaos. So how do we help them right now? What other opportunities are there that we can reskill, say, for our automotive workforce? Because we don't know what's going to happen, right? So I think we have to take this sort of time of change and be the change leaders.
Yes.
To me, I think that's what universities try to do. We're not teaching you how to be a better engineer or scientist or policy person. We're trying to make you the change leaders.
Yes.
And I think that's what we really have to start focusing on, is how do we do that? How do we focus on that change? And we're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Right? There's no doubt there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be mistakes in policy. There's going to be mistakes in technology chosen. There's definitely no world silver bullet. I hate everybody saying, I'm going to wait till this thing comes on board, or this thing, fusion's only 5 years away. No, we can't wait. We have all of these resources. We have all this expertise around the world. Let's start bringing the best to the best and grow.
Yeah, I agree. Engagement is key. And it's interesting to focus on unions. I think a lot of people are anxious. We're wealthier than we've ever been, but there's more inequality than we've ever seen before. And a lot of you're like, I'm never going to buy a house. I'm never going to retire. All of these concerns are real. And there's enough money around for us to do this in a just way. We just need to take those concerns seriously and listen to each other and not just ignore them and go, oh, don't worry, you'll retrain. We can take this seriously and address it properly.
Yeah, and I think the name of the game moving forward is going to be adaptation. I think we have to stop thinking about, my industry is oil and gas. Well, no, not necessarily. Your industry is energy. don't box yourself into one solution only, because then that's what you're trained to do and that's what you're going to do. And if the work stops, then you're out of business. Whereas if, for instance, you have the automotive industry, they can easily, in a way, change their processes and use the same tools to do different things, like, for instance, doing heat pumps. So how about instead of calling yourself the automotive industry, you call yourself the specialized machine industry, something like that. But
Transportation.
we'll get you on, right? Transportation industry. But
Make bus engines.
there you go. Yeah. But I think it's just about that adaptation.
Yeah. We have time for one last question. I saw your hands up, so I want to take that. Yeah.
I'm very curious about the recycle heating. Sounds very phenomenal, very interesting research. But I'm kind of just wondering, with Canada being a country that's pretty notoriously hard to get anything really changed, transitioned beyond the pilot stages of a lot of projects, especially when it comes to changing into like a new, say like for healthcare. I'm in nursing, so like I'm very into healthcare. Very hard to try to transition any of our policy there. And infrastructure can be pretty hard too. We're pretty notoriously bad at building new infrastructure nowadays. I'm just wondering if you identify any challenges with the building of this new infrastructure, like the hot water pipes, I believe you said, and if there's any infrastructure already in place to help assist that transition.
Okay, so regulations are unbelievable. So I spent 7 years changing regulations associated with the restaurant industry to allow for waste heat recovery from commercial appliances. It took us 7 years to change. And you know what it was? Is the regulations didn't recognize that buoyancy was a driven type flow. Okay, it doesn't make sense, but hot air rises. Okay, that's real, but you have to do it right. So I find that is one of the bigger challenges is this transition of regulations and understanding regulations and engineers and nurses and healthcare workers getting more engaged in regulations is I think going to be a very important element of that. And then same with other things. I'm getting more and more engaged in policy. I'm an engineer. I never thought that would be my pathway of my career. But I'm finding that maybe that's how I can make a difference because I can say whatever I want, right? I work at a university. That is this freedom we have at a university is to say, this is what I think is right. I'm not trying to make money on it. Well, maybe I am through my company, never mind. But when I'm looking at regulatory changes and things and infrastructure for social good, there's things. Right-of-ways are a big thing. Why can Enbridge come to your house and put a pipeline through your property? There's no lawyers. Your lawyer could never stop them. It's because they have right-of-way. It's regulatory environment. So that is what has to change, right? And yes, we have to get better at it because it takes a long time. It's way too long, given the timelines we have to sort of try to mitigate and adapt to climate change.
Thank you. We'll have to wrap it up there. It remains for me to say thank you to our wonderful, wonderful panelists for a very insightful and productive discussion. Leah, Dave, and Jim. This has been very productive. I certainly learned a lot on this topic. And to our audience of students and faculty for joining us for this third in the series of the McMaster Dialogue. To our President David for initiating this and continuing to support it. And to all the technical people and communications people who help us make this happen every time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.